This is Jake Friedman speaking, secretary of the Phil Walker Harding Fan Club. Will all other members in attendance please state their name for the record?
Paul Salomon here, fan club member. I am present.
Brendan Hansen, fan club member, present.
All right, recording a quorum. We can now begin the meeting.
Talking back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Brendan Hansen.
I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Paul Salomon.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
Today we're going to be talking about Bärenpark, a entry weight, kind of family weight tile placement game by designer Phil Walker Harding. That came out in 2017. Can't wait to get in the conversation with you guys about this wonderful little game.
Yeah, I'm really excited as well. And obviously, it's amazing to have you back on the show. Paul Salomon, of course, designer of Genotype, of Honeybuzz, and many other great games. And we're just so lucky to have you back. If you enjoy Paul in this episode, definitely go back and listen to the Star Realms episodes and any of the Jake and Paul Talk Games episodes. Paul, how you doing today?
Guys, thank you for having me. I'd like to let you know, listeners, that you are hearing me on my 39th birthday, and it's a special moment.
What? Happy birthday, Paul.
Thank you very much. This is how I chose to spend it. So let's really make the most of this time together, okay?
That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
And speaking of Star Realms, I just want to go on a side note here and let you know something. So everybody, fans of the podcast will know Star Realms, my number one game. I love it. Favorite thing. And the community for that game is amazing. And the tradition is that on your birthday, they send you just dozens to hundreds of challenges on the app. And it's called a swarm. And the format coding is sort of like very happy birthday to you. And it is just actually meaningful each year to get like hundreds of challenges from all of my friends on that game. And so I'm kind of buried in Star Realms right now as well.
Amazing. That's awesome. Yeah. I love it. Happy birthday, Swarm.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. This is kind of like we're all 30-somethings right now, but not for long.
Not long. And then I'm going to the MA 40 plus division on the disc golf circuit.
Let's go. Yeah, that's the other important thing to know about Paul. Currently the number one tag holder in our St. Louis disc golf /board game group. So congratulations to
30-foot putt to win that number one tag. So that'll be a big moment too.
Yeah. Well, what do you guys say we jump into our discussion of this game? And the way we typically start out is everybody give a little rating and capsule thoughts of the game. Paul, as the guest and most biased member here, you said you're a member, but we all know you're actually the president.
I know. I didn't want to go. We hadn't held elections yet this year, and I didn't want to presume, but I figured I was president.
Yeah, you're the president. So I think it would make sense for the president to start off this meeting.
Okay, well, I would like to call the meeting to order, and I'll remind you about Bärenpark. I was just going to check when last I did my top 100. I'm confident this is in my top 20, but I'll come back and let you know in a minute. Let me start with my rating. This is on the BGG scale, a 10 out of 10 for me. I double-checked BGG. That's what it's rated. And I think the wording there is like, outstanding game, will always enjoy playing. And that is absolutely true. In the realm of polyomino games, crowded with Uwe Rosenberg titles and Phil Walker Harding titles for that matter, this is still my favorite. It does so many good things right. And I'm just going to say Bärenpark, weird name, but elegantly tricky little puzzle game. Love this thing.
Fantastic.
Had to be.
Awesome. I'm so glad it's a 10 out of 10 for you, Paul. That makes me really excited. Jake, you go next.
I'm going to give Bärenpark a 7.5 out of 10. I think it's a great game. And, bit notwithstanding that every game is a 7 for me. I think that this game really fits right into that, where it's a game that is a joy to play. I think it's simple and accessible. But for me, maybe some of the games I've played exclusively playing online and primarily playing asynchronously. So take that with a grain of salt. That's how I'm coming to this conclusion, is that it felt like many of the games sort of were decided relatively early on, leading to an end game that doesn't feel like as exciting as I might prefer. So that's sort of the caveat that keeps it out of the elite, amazing game category for me, but still a great game, very fun. Brendan, over to you.
Okay, so I think Bärenpark is delightful and it's fun. And I think it's really interesting because the tile placement puzzle is so inexorably linked to the timing considerations of when to take tiles. And the design of Bärenpark is so much coming from the perspective of trying to solve the problem of how do you randomize tiles that are all shaped in different shapes. You can't just put them in a deck and draw them. It doesn't work. So you get these icons on the board that you then cover up, which then let you select different tiles. Brilliant, amazing piece of design. I love the multiple player boards. The bear statue, excellent. But I suffer from a few of the same considerations of Jake, where I feel like runaway leader problems can happen, though we're talking about a 25, 30-minute game. So at the end of the day, Bärenpark is a solid 8 out of 10 for me. I think this is a lovely game. It's a wonderful game, and I would be happy to play it anytime. But there's things about the decision space that leave me wishing that I had a little bit more fuzziness in the tiling puzzle, and maybe that the game didn't emphasize timing considerations with when to take an offbeat to block someone in the tile market quite as much. I think that's where this game really lives, and I want it to live a little bit more on my board.
Well, I'd like to thank you guys, first of all, for concluding the elections. I am officially now the president, and in my eyes, you have a little work to do to kind of make up and earn your space here in the Phil Walker Harding Club, but that's good. It's a good game. We're going to get into a lot of what you talked about there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should say it's a 10 for Paul, a 7.5 for me, and an 8 for Brendan. So that's a recommendation from all of us. We already mentioned that this is a 2017 game designed by Phil Walker Harding. It was published by Lookout Games. Let's jump into Brendan's rules overview, and then we'll be back on the other side to deep dive what we were talking about with the decision space and the decisions in this game.
Bärenpark is a polyomino tile placement game in which players build a bear park, taking turns adding polyomino tiles depicting different enclosures and attractions to their 4x4 square park boards in pursuit of placing tiles efficiently while expanding their park by adding up to 3 new boards and trying to meet specified objectives along the way. Each turn in Bärenpark is simple. Players select one tile in their supply and place it adjacent to any tile they've previously placed in their park. Park boards depict 4 types of symbols, and each show 2 green wheelbarrows, 2 white cement trucks, and 1 orange excavator, and finally 1 construction crew. When a player covers up one of these symbols on their board, they take a corresponding action. For example, for each of the 3 vehicle types, they take tiles from a corresponding display of tiles, with each subsequent vehicle type providing access to larger tiles and typically more points. Larger tiles also are typically a better way to more efficiently allow the player to fill in their boards, but placed in a strange manner or wrongly may slow their progress towards objectives or reduce a player's overall tile laying efficiency. Tiles are limited in nature, and some shapes only come in a single tile. There are real timing considerations with regards to when to take certain tiles. Construction crews allow players to add new player boards adjacent to their starting board or other boards they've previously placed, expanding their park. Finally, each board shows 1 pit. Pits cannot be covered up, ever, by any tile. Well, not ever. Instead, players must build around them, and once they fully fill out that specific park board, covering up all the other spaces on the board, they take the most valuable bear statue tile still remaining in a shared display, and these range in value from 16 points all the way down to 2, and plop it into the location of that pit, completing the board. What tension Bärenpark has comes from players pursuing multiple overlaid and juxtaposed objectives simultaneously. In a given turn, they may want to place so they can select a specific tile, fill in a board to access a more valuable bear token, or place a smaller tile to complete an objective. Playing Bärenpark well means paying attention to each player's progress at the table. A game ends when one player has acquired and filled in 4 park boards. Then each other player gets 1 additional turn, at which point the player with the most points is crowned the victor.
And we're back. Thank you, Brendan, as always, for taking the time to record that, and hopefully it gives people listening some idea of how to play this game. It is available to play on Board Game Arena, making it very accessible if you wanted to jump over there and give it a try. But what do you guys say we jump right into the decision space and start out by sort of trying our best to characterize the type of decision space in this game.
I think I'm just going to jump out. Let's get this out of the way. Like most polyomino games, it's a waning decision space game, right? Like as you fill up your boards, you are reducing the number of decisions you have in pursuing these different objectives and in getting certain tiles. But there is the wrinkle of adding these other player boards, and the timing of when you add them basically balloons the decision space back up 3 times over the course of play. And the fact that you have agency as a player over when that happens is one of the most interesting things of the game for me.
Totally. I will agree that, well, you're right. As your board fills in, you have less and less places to go. The one thing that you didn't mention is as you add these player boards, you get an additional symbol, which allows you to get an additional tile type, which is the, pentomino 5 guys, I believe. And those have the highest point values on them, but so again, the timing of when that happens does expand kind of what you need to do. I'm not sure I would call it waxing or waning, just insofar as like when you take your turn and take the 4-point tile that I needed, and it changes my point scheme considerations where it's like, well, I had planned to finish this board in a certain pattern with these moves, but that's not there anymore, and now I'm going to pivot a little bit. So, that's neither really waxing nor waning, but it is a little more tactical than just static,
Yeah. I mean, interestingly enough, I think the hallmark is for a waning decision space game is at the end of the game, right? You're coming down to have no decisions left. And that's essentially the case here if you look at the whole arc of the game as a whole. So I can definitely see where you're coming from. But I also think that there's a really strong argument for considering this to be a dynamic game, a dynamic decision space game. And I think the key element there is that you have different beats for when that decision space opens up and closes, right?
Yeah.
I could see also an argument for calling it, getting very in the weeds, but like a punctuated waning decision space. That's what we would call a game like the Castles of Burgundy, which is probably familiar to a lot of our listeners, where you're basically playing out a board of tiles and then it will refill and you'll have a waning decision space all the way down again. And I think that kind of happens here, but it's so much more contingent upon the decisions you make of when to expand your board. And then that's also contingent upon the path made available to you by the decisions your opponents are making.
Yeah.
I love too that given the different plays of this game will have completely different shapes of decision spaces too, to that nature, right? Because Jake, you and I were playing a game and you did this interesting strategy where you basically covered up all your connection workers, like construction workers, I should say, which are the images you have to cover up to get new boards. And you had all 4 boards out within like 5 or 6 turns. So, and you laid them all in this straight line. So your decision space then looks really different and you beat me in that game, which really pisses me off because there's no way you should have won that game. But it looks really different than the sort of typical game where you mostly fill in one board, get a second one, finish that first board so you can get one of the juicy bear statues, plop it in there for a bunch of points, and then you focus on this next little puzzle of one board. You add a third one, you finish that one, and it's a little more plotting, I guess, in nature. But the game gives you the agency to sort of spread your wings if you want to fly.
And there's a lot of different parts of what makes the decision space large or small at times, because obviously you have to place your tiles adjacent to existing tiles. And so the more tiles you have down, that expands the locations you can play in. So in that sense, it waxes for a long time. It has that crescendo early. But on the other hand, you start out with one green tile. And if you don't cover a symbol on your first turn, which don't do that, then you have a very bad second turn. And typically for the first 10%, maybe even, 15, 20% of the game, you only have one tile in hand. And that you won't be able to expand that part of the decision space until you cover 2 symbols at once. But then towards the middle of the game, you've got one of the larger value houses that you need to try to get down. And so I think the point values guide your decision space. They funnel it down on each turn and let you know what's a smart thing to be doing, even though the space itself can be pretty big in the middle of the game.
Yeah.
Do you think so?
I feel like...
I was just going to say, like, I think overall, like overwhelmingly, I feel like the decision space in this game, and this said without value, I think it's actually one of the big strengths of the game is that it's pretty reined in. Like compared to a lot of the games we cover on the podcast, you're picking between, at most generally like 2 to 3 different tiles that you could reasonably place and in like 2 to 3 different locations. So just talking about like the sheer number of uh, choices that you're actually considering on a given turn, I think I would consider it on the smaller end of just like a decision space size.
Yeah.
But I do think, interestingly, to Paul's point, I didn't come into this discussion, I didn't do my sort of review at the start thinking about the fact that it is so much a player agency driven decision space. You can end up in a play of this game where you're always just sort of like, okay, I do this, I do this, I do this, and you're sort of railroaded like down a subway path. And or you can play it and sort of have a bunch of different options, really build wide, and then fit the puzzle together. And I think that in that sense, it can be it can feel like almost like solving the Zool puzzle every turn if you have that large of a puzzle.
Yeah.
But it's still small. I'm with you, Jake.
Well,
Jake's like doing the groan test over here.
Here's what I'll say about it that I think is where this game is so beautiful for me as a design is that it, we talked about it being kind of family weight, beginner weight. And it really is. It's that Phil Walker Harding, like perfect level of ease of play where it's like, how do I get this? Literally cover the thing. That part of how you execute a turn flow is so clean. But the depth of the game is the sequencing down turns. It's like you can predict almost everything you're going to play. I'm going to cover this symbol, get that tile, use it to cover this, do that. This is how it's going to pixel in. So you can choose to put yourself on rails, and reevaluate each turn whether you want to veer off that. But especially when you play with the expert, quote unquote, expert variant, and you have these specific goals where I have to get 3 food streets in a straight row. And that has big implications for how I lay my boards down. And that means I need to not forget that for like 10 turns in a row. I think the times when you go off the rails are where kind of the game is probably won and lost and makes it really engaging. Like each turn is small, but it's tied to the big arc of the game for you, and making sure you play that well just keeps you really tied down, keeps you in it.
I think what we're getting into here is sort of the clarity of the decision space. And I think, where fuzziness can be caused by, I don't know what tiles the other people are going to take before it gets back to my turn, because the way the game is structured with you can just visually see all the tiles that are going to be available to you, and you can very easily calculate out in your head like, okay, I want to get this orange tile, that's going to take me 3 moves to get it. It creates like a sense of planning out your turns that is only capable, I think, in like a really clear decision space, which is also something that I think aids this game as like a fantastic choice for like an entry weight, family weight game.
I love, though, that with so I think that the expert variant is the way I would play the game almost always. Maybe if I was playing with a really new gamer who wasn't familiar with a lot of rules, introducing the game without those objectives could be fine. But otherwise, I want to play with them always, because the decision space is just so much more interesting when you're layering the objectives into the considerations. And I think that because of what you said, Paul, a lot of them make you make decisions that go beyond a single board, right? You're trying to lay out the L-shaped river tiles to connect 3 of them. So then you're having to think about what boards you want to add and what consequences those boards might have. Because if there's a pit blocking where you're going to, place your river tile, then you have to find a way to waste time until someone else is going to take a board, a new one gets flipped, you can take it. I think that the timing puzzle gets emphasized a lot by the objectives being introduced, and it becomes even more interesting in that sense.
Totally true.
The first time we played this game with 2 other people in our decision space Discord without the objectives, I think we were all kind of just like, wait, what?
There's nothing here.
Yeah. And then we tried it again with the objectives, and we're like, okay, like now I can understand the game here a little bit better. And I think that speaks to just like how incredibly clear, and I would say personally, to me, too clear of a decision space the game can be without the extra complexity of the objectives. Because, I mean, if you think about a very clear decision space, right? Like listeners would probably think of something like tic-tac-toe. And this isn't tic-tac-toe, but that just highlights, what a super, super, super clear decision space can be, where you can just I can actually just think through everything I'm going to do until the end of the game. And I think that this, in the beginner way of playing, can feel like it is approaching that.
To be fair, though, during that play, we felt that way at the end. But before that, we were all saying, this is so fun, I can't wait to play again, because the tactile joy of playing this game is really delightful. The fact that the green tiles are all a little bit smaller and less efficient, the animal house tiles are all tetrominoes, and then the orange excavator unlock tiles are all the pentominoes. I think the game has a really good rhythm and flow to it. And there's few games that we've primarily, you and I, Jake, played this online. And there's few games that I would say have a tactile joy online. And somehow Bärenpark manages to do it. Like the puzzle, I don't get it. It unlocks the pentomino, polyomino joy for me in the way that playing Patchwork physically does. And I think a lot of that is because of the way that this game, Phil Walker Harding was clearly so careful to think about what's fun about polyominoes and let you make decisions that let you do it, right? The bear statue is the primary example of that. But I think there's even more going on in the tile design that isn't obvious, that leads to interesting things where I get to fill in holes. And I think it's partially the small play space. It's covering stuff up. I don't know. It's kind of magic, I think. I think the tile placement of this game is kind of magical.
Yeah, this is also, I think, the first time that Phil Walker Harding uses this cover up and get mechanism, where you cover the thing and get it. And he repeated this in Gingerbread House, which is not as good, in my opinion. And then in Llama Land, kind of put those two together in a really nice way. And it's just so satisfying to, as you said earlier, Brendan, tie the placement to the draft in such a simple way. It's fabulous. And then it very much scratches the itch of I want to pack things in. I need to get it to fit efficiently, which is what a game like Second Chance does, except this has, other ideas in it that is good for games to have. It's so clean, guys. I can't stop saying that. This is Phil Walker Harding doing it the best he does it.
Do you like this more than Llama Land, Paul?
I have played Llama Land more recently and liked Llama Land more in that play. It just felt different in a way that was really exciting. That's a bigger design too, but I think Bärenpark is still my favorite. I just think that the puzzle of doing it, in a way, like what Jake's saying, I think it's straightforward in a way that I like a lot. I like understanding point schemes very clearly, and it doesn't have the mystery payout of an engine build that you don't know where it's going exactly, and I appreciate that. And I will say that I did look it up. This was my number 9 game of all time, just ahead of Gizmos by Phil Walker Harding.
I will say, I think this kind of goes back to my previous point and one you just made, Paul, is I think the board itself, the puzzling is straightforward. But what's not straightforward is the consequences of what you're doing when you're doing them, right? Because of the way the bear statues come out, because of what other players are doing and that limited pool of resources. So if the game has really sheer clarity on your player board, where it doesn't necessarily is it the consequences of those actions because of the opportunity cost of not doing something else, right? Yep. By filling in my first board, I don't necessarily know what tiles I might not be able to get access to because it depends on what you two might do after me. And if I take a downbeat to cover up an orange excavator so I can get that perfect polyomino pentomino tile, I don't know, is one bear statue going to get taken and I just lose 2 points for that downbeat? Mm-hmm. Or do 2 bear statues get taken and all of a sudden I'm costing myself even more points? So I think sometimes to some people I could see how that would feel like, oh, that's half dozen of one thing, 6 of the other, depending on, I'm getting points on the bigger tile, I'm losing it on the bear statue, whatever. But I don't think that's always how it plays out.
Yeah.
I have just a couple other points on the clarity. So first is, I think a lot of my plays have been at 2 players, and this is definitely going to feel the clearest at lower player counts, because a lot of time in the 2-player game, I played a lot with Brendan, and I can look at his board and see like, okay, he just won't be able to fill one of his boards on the next turn because he doesn't have the right tile or he has too many spots for it. So, I don't have to push the tempo in that direction now. I'm free to do a setup play to get a better tile now, where if you have 3 or 4 people playing, there's just more consideration there and more uncertainty around what tiles are going to be available to you in general. So I do think just playing it at more players is probably, I haven't done that as much, but I think that is something that would address some of that kind of issue that I have with the game. But the other thing is, and this is just a question for you, Paul, because I think you've likely played this a lot more than me, was I was noticing just kind of an interesting thing in how the game was playing out, where I felt like the decision space was bigger and more interesting in games where I wasn't doing particularly well. Like it felt like in the games where there were quite a few games, especially at 2 players, but this also happened at higher player counts, where I was ahead the whole way through. And it really felt like just every play just linked perfectly into the next, which is a satisfying thing, but it's not really great from like a decision space perspective. It felt like I always had a super obvious play the whole time through, and I get to the end and it's like, wow, that just worked out great. Whereas it feels like now I'm like behind on this objective, and I'm behind on the bear statues of filling up areas. Now I have choices to make. So I was just curious if either of you guys experienced something similar in your plays of this game.
I would just say that I don't necessarily have a good sense as I play of who is winning. I feel like I'm, for the most part, there's a lot of race elements, and I'm kind of working on my own race. As you said, like you described, the winning experience is a feeling of pretty much peak efficiency. It's like but that feels great to me. I can't imagine being a Jake Friedman that complains about having a fully efficient, gorgeous sequence of moves. I mean, you're trying to go to fisticuffs or something to have a great game. But, I think there are times where you go like the experience that I have each time, and like kind of my catchphrase when I play this game is like, oh no, mistakes have been made, where it's like I lost sight of something and I put this down. And so the chunk of green tiles I was planning on being connected are now disconnected, and I have to pivot. And I think that's fun. I think the game doesn't get in your way a big lot. But it lets you kind of, I think the puzzle is big enough, as simple as it is. It's deep enough, far enough down the train tracks that you're going to lose sight of something and it's going to ask you to try again. And I like that, I don't think I've ever, again, I don't play Bärenpark with the Jake Friedmans of the worlds. Okay. The perfect players. All right. But, I feel like everybody I play this game with messes it up at some point and is like, oh no, I should have done this other thing. And that might just partly be that I mostly play with like students who haven't played before, and it's just working for us. At some point, maybe we'll chat about the expansion. But one thing I do want to mention before we hear Brennan's answer is just that this game is a record holder for the literal worst insert of all time, if it could be called an insert. And I don't know if they still even ship that, but I just thought it would be worth mentioning. And I've put it out to Lookout Spiel multiple times in Mayfair to just post a picture of how someone is supposed to use that insert, what it's designed to, how it's supposed to function. That would be really good because it's the record holder for literal worst.
Do you just pile everything in the box, Paul?
It's a great question, and I know that our listeners will not be able to see this, but I will just show you one of my first inserts that I made with, chipboard or whatever this is called, is like that, and it's got like a little tray, and things come out. The expansion does not fit in that box, but made my own insert.
That was lovely.
Yeah,
I wish y'all could see it.
Yep.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, my response to what Jake just said. What I've learned is that this game is designed for tabletop play.
Yes.
Obviously.
I was going to say the same thing.
But clearly what's happening here is Jake and I have primarily played it online, where we get to have an experience that was not designed to the base game. There's no score tracker, right? In the base game, you're not moving a little bear token around a track that shows you exactly who has 46 points and who has 36 points. So at the table, you just don't know. And it's left unclear. It's left fuzzy. So you don't have that feedback. And I think that moving online, where we're primarily playing on Board Game Arena, we're hypersensitive to that score tracker in a way that you're not experiencing in tabletop play, right? So Jake's like, oh, I'm just winning the whole time through. Where at the table, you just have no sense of that. You just feel like, I'm playing a really good game. Oh my gosh, I won this game playing so well the whole time. Whereas Jake saying, oh my gosh, I'm a runaway leader. What the heck? Did no one else have a comeback opportunity?
Yeah, or the other person or somebody else at the table is the runaway leader. I think it was more, not that I'm such a genius.
Sure. I don't know. But I liked how we were just roasting Jake. I feel like
he's the number one tag holder for the Bärenpark. So there's just a running score on BGA. It just says this is your current score, and you could read it off the boards, but it's there.
And I would say the experience playing there is that the person who gets out to an early lead is very difficult to catch. There's no inherent catch-up mechanism in this game.
No.
And I think that's a much bigger problem when you're aware of everybody's score than it would be sitting at the table.
And two, were you guys playing asynchronously for the most part? Because I think this game asynchronously is going to be, and maybe most games, but this one especially, like the thing I was describing of having to hold on to your strategy while other people take their turns and it comes back to you in real time is a really different experience from checking back into the game and spending what feels like enough time reminding yourself of what's going on and making a clean decision in the moment. That's going to be a really different experience. Whereas keeping a pace of play and letting the game flow happen on this, around the table is going to change the way that it feels to be a player in the game.
Yeah, I'm really glad we touched on this because I think that those 2 points that y'all both made are absolutely right. And I think that also speaks a lot to what my biggest issue of this game that I keep going back to is like how clear the decision space feels. Is that like when you're playing this asynchronously, like as you point out, Paul, it's like figure outable. Like I can spend 5 minutes if I need to, and I can always figure out the best move. And if I'm, taking a 15-minute break from work and taking turns on my Board Game Arena async games, I have no problem doing that, but I would never spend 5 minutes on a turn of this game if I was sitting at a table with you and Brendan.
Yeah.
We don't normally structure the conversation this way, but I'm really curious to know what each of your favorite mechanism in terms of decisions are in this game.
I think it just has to be, well, it's just the way that the tile placement is tied to the grabbing of stuff because it feeds directly into the tile draft and like pushing your decisions down, trying to see further and further into what you need and what the shape's going to look like. Everything about visualizing the future of your game comes from that. So that for sure is, I think, the most beautiful little thing in there.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a great answer. I think that is the key differentiating mechanic in the game. But I would say I do like the polyomino aspect in this game where the big valuable 5 square tiles or whatever are one of a kind. So like I like that forces you to, as you're building out. I always like games a lot where I feel like the design is asking you to like make a bet, and I think this does that by asking you to like build towards one of those tiles that you hope you're going to be able to get because it fits with the tiles you've previously placed and the objective as well. So I like that aspect of it.
Yeah. I think for me, the more I've played this game, the more I've really enjoyed the multiple board system and having agency over when your boards expand. I feel like my most interesting decisions come in terms of that now and looking forwards and sort of saying, okay, if I take this board, first of all, where am I going to put it? And how does that relate to all the other decisions I want to make? Right? Like, I think decisions become really interesting when there's some decisions where it's just like, I'm taking this key and I'm putting it into this lock and then I'm going to unlock it and proceed to the next decision. And I think here the boards function as like, you're looking for the right lock for the keys that you have in a way, right? Like, it's not like I'm just going from, I have a key, I'm going to put it in this lock that I know is before me. It's like, which path do I want to take? And I think that combination becomes really interesting. And then beyond that, not just what board, but where do I want to put it, I think is really interesting and fun. You can have an ultimate board shape that's a rectangle. You could have an ultimate board shape that's an L. You have an ultimate board shape that's a square. And I like that you can have a completely different play space than the people sitting to the left or the right of you.
Yeah.
If you want to be mad, you can make a long rectangle of 4 in a row like Jake does.
Yeah.
Or you can make a square, and that's cool. And you won't do the same thing in all games.
Yeah.
And you won't always appreciate why unless you look back. And I think that's just a really lovely thing about Phil Walker Harding games.
Yeah. I do love that that the shape of my overall Bärenpark feels different each game. And I just like, not even, it doesn't even matter if I was shooting for something or not, but just having an appreciation of like, oh, this time I made a Z. That I like that at the end. And one of the things that you talked about placing those extra pieces, some of the objectives really lean on that. Like there's some that want you to complete 2 boards at the same time. It's like you have to play around that for so many turns to make it happen. And then it gives you this big reward of serotonin because you get like 2 bear statues and an achievement, or the one that wants you to cover 2 orange symbols at once. And then that means that when you place a board, you want an orange symbol that's kind of on the edge of that board near to an orange symbol on the edge of another board, and then get the right tile that can do it. That's really fun. But then, of course, it also gives you 2 big orange pieces, which are going to take up a lot of space and maybe create some real odd spaces you have to fill, but they're going to give you a lot of points. And so it's, as I said before, it's pretty clearly telling you what you ought to try to do. But there's still an interesting puzzle and result in trying to achieve it.
I think the objectives is worthy of a little bit further discussion as well, because there are definitely some here that I like more than others.
Absolutely.
And I think that the ones specifically that are just around collecting specific bear types. So there's 4 different types of bears in the game: polar bears, goby bears, koalas, and pandas. And there are one objective associated with each that just tells you to get 3 tiles. And I think that is just a lot less interesting. And I think it actually exacerbates the runaway leader problem that can exist in this game, especially online. Because there's no working towards those goals does not inhibit you from working towards another goal, right? There's no trade-off there.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have some of these other ones that are like how you construct your board in a different way, if one of them is asking you to create a river of 3 segments and one of them is asking you to create a road of 3 segments, like you're having to decide which type of tile to go for when you're getting new green tiles. And if one player at the table is going for one of them, that might afford you the opportunity to strategically choose a different objective to try and get first.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about those?
I think it is almost to the point where I don't play with those achievement tiles because they are so uninteresting. And the way that it isn't tied to the placement, like I just described that my favorite thing is the connection between the placement and the drafting. And this is something that is just on the drafting. And so especially in a 2-player game, I think there's maybe 6 total tiles for each type. And that means that if I take 4, I can deny you. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty obviously what I need to do each time. And that's just it's not that cool. I do like the way that when you play with those, maybe in a 4-player game, it's a little better. The stack of houses, the easy ones to get will kind of disappear. And then you're like, oh, but I could still get it if I go get a 5. I do like that little workaround, but overall it's significantly less interesting than, the ones I described earlier, or the ones that want you to have 6 green tiles next to each other, because they often accentuate a part of the game that you're not usually going to pay attention to. And I really like when games expand in that direction.
I do think that these force early competition for the houses in an interesting way. But like you two said, it's sort of once it's done, like once the houses are claimed, the air kind of gets let out of that part of the game in a frustrating way. I think it forces different play patterns in a way that feels good to be playing, but doesn't lead to interesting decisions. Like I like that when you're playing with a polar bear game, someone's going to have to figure out how to fit that dumb cross on their board. Right? And I like that when I'm playing with gobies, which I don't know why Jake said goby
They
bear
are
like
real,
we're
baby.
making some unicorn.
This is a
Bears.
They're real
real
things.
It caught me off guard. It caught me off guard.
Well,
Gobi bear?
it is worth mentioning that koala bears are not bears, right? And panda
That is
bears
true.
are not bears. Is that true?
That's it. I'm bumping my rating down.
I think
Okay,
Zero
bring it
out of
down.
10. Literally unplayable.
Okay, I move to disband, disbar this man from membership in the club.
Is there a second?
Yeah. Action approved. Okay, let's get back on the achievements. I think if the animal ones are a little boring and tame, I think the spatial ones are amazing. The one that wants you to make a long river, so you have to connect 3 of the L-shaped river tiles together. You're having to really think about the cost of doing this and watch how quickly other players are doing it, because you're potentially decimating your whole board. You're playing everything you do around it. And the same is true for the one where you want 6 green areas touching. You're from the very first tile you place, if you're going to be your most efficient, on turn 1 you're placing a green tile. So you want all 6 of your green tiles to be touching that first tile you place. And that really changes the decision space.
Yeah.
Love it.
Very
3
hard.
orange ones touching?
Very
Don't like
hard.
It. Oh, that's brutal. So hard.
Yeah.
I just throw
I
my
like
game
that
in the dumpster every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you do. Oh, the double bear statue, like Paul said, I think that one's really interesting, because that's another one too, where it's sort of like, this is an objective that I should be going for, but I can't waste my time doing it. And it's forcing you to think about the timing considerations of this game, which I think the best Phil Walker Harding games do. Like Emotep, a game that Jake and I both really love, and Paul, I know you quite enjoy, is all about this exact same type of decisions of when is it the right time to do X, and what is the cost in terms of timing of doing X. And I think that the twice as nice getting 2 bear statues at once, getting that too early is too expensive from a timing consideration. You don't want it too early. You want to be 1 turn ahead of everyone else's ability to do it. And that's the game, being 1 turn ahead of everyone else.
And the one of completing 2 at once, it's saying, hey, I know you could finish your board right now and get a nice fat bear statue. Could you just wait? If you just wait a little longer, maybe somebody will get one, but then I'll give you 2 and I'll give you extra points. And that's really engaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that one a lot, because the inherent trade-off there is so obvious of the finishing versus waiting. And it seems like there's some thought to that, as that one awards 10 points for first, which is more than some of the other tiles. The other experience I've had with some of these achievements is just that, like, it sounds easier than they are to achieve, which is nice. Like, especially the long food street and the long river one. You're just like, how easy is it to just like put 3 interlocking tiles together? I have all these boards to play with. And then to your point about mistakes were made halfway through the game, you're like, well, that's no longer achievable by me. Nice job.
I put a pit right there, or I did, I put my boards in the wrong spot, and it's over. That moment is past for me. I'll have to figure out how to do this some other way.
Yeah.
The one with 3 food stalls in a row is so interesting to me, because typically you're going to do that on the edge of one of on your boards, right? You're not going to do that in the middle, because it's too hard to fill it in otherwise. So it's really saying, okay, make your play space a 3x3 functionally for the rest of decisions that you're making, and then I'll give you this reward, because it's not a hard decision to say, like, okay, these 3 go in a row, but it makes the other part of the puzzle hard. And that's what good achievement design does, right? It doesn't just shift your decisions in pursuing it. It shifts everything else you might do. So that one's a huge win for me. I also like the one where you have to do one of each animal house. Because it just forces you to make decisions you wouldn't otherwise make, which we've already talked about, and it spreads things out. Oh, the mechanic too of getting it first and then revealing a lower value card, really great. I love it here so much more than Enjoy Per. It's just it's wonderful.
Paul, you're like a math guy, right?
That's true.
So with the 5 square tiles, what do we call those?
Pentominoes. Yes, sir.
Are these pentominoes like all the pentomino shapes that there could be, or are these like specifically curated pentominoes to create the best possible play experience?
Jake, I'd like to commend you. That is a profoundly beautiful mathematical question, and it is one that humans have wondered about for years and years, and I've taught this for years and years. That's all of them, baby. That's it. There are 12, I believe, and we got them all in there.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious about that, and so
and I really love that, because in Llama Land, all of the tiles are pentominoes, but they're all the same 5 pentominoes. So he, again, like as you said, he sort of had a curated selection. But here he used all 12. And when you can kind of, I for a while did mathematical art, and a lot of my art that I did was connected to like, how big is this set of possibilities? How can you show them all? How do they connect and relate? And anytime you can use like the full set in a game, it enhances the clarity and symmetry of the design in a really nice way, where it's like, everything's right there. That just is a nice way to answer the question.
This is the equivalent of Paul, you were saying everything's so clean in this game. This is aesthetic cleanliness, using the full polyomino set. And he almost does it with the Tetrominoes too. The 4 for the animal houses. He leaves out the Tetris piece everyone loves. I think that's like a good decision because it makes it more interesting.
With the Tetrominoes, then there is still curating going on, though. It's not like he threw it all in, because he's curated which are going to be most difficult to use by slapping the 8 points on those, and the ones that are more easy and intuitive have fewer points. I think that's really nice too. And it does in play. Like, I think he's got it right. By and large, where it feels like, I can take the highest scoring one, and I probably want to take that if I can, but it's going to take more work to incorporate that into my plans in an efficient way. Yeah. Maybe with the exception of the koala one, that's the like hook. Or not a hook. The U-turn.
Oh, the U.
The U-turn's pretty easy. I think you just slap that on a pit, and that's pretty nice.
Sure. Totally. Yeah, I do too.
I like the
W. Stepper.
The W.
For sure.
With pandas on it.
And I do think most of the time I'm grabbing one of the highest valued 5s remaining, you know. That's a pretty clear place, but then you got to figure out how to put it down. And I find that at the end of the game, I've left a couple of animal houses that I couldn't get down, and that's points I'm missing when, you know, at the point later in the game where I had 3 tiles in my hand, like I put down a green one when I really needed to put down whatever animal house, that it just wasn't working at that point.
I've done that too, Paul, and it makes me think that the more I play this game, the more I think that there are decisions at times where you cover up a cement truck, the symbol that lets you take one of those animal houses, and the right decision is actually to snipe wheelbarrow tiles. It's to deny people the 3 L shape or the 3 long shape. And it's because there's just moments where everyone's boards have coalesced that hurting people in terms of the exact tile they need is going to help me more. If it doesn't matter, I can hold a hand of tiles and play the denial game. I'm not quite there, but I think that play pattern will emerge, and that's really interesting.
Yeah, I do like the rule, and I typically forget to explain it when I teach the rules, that when you draft tiles, you can draft lesser tiles. And I do think that there are times I've passed up on like a 2-point animal house to take one of those 3 food streets or one of the rivers or whatever. And I do really like that.
That's interesting. I don't know that I'm with you guys yet on that being a great idea. Like, I feel like for me when I'm playing this game, and what I think makes it so nice and intuitive to play, is because the heuristics are like really clear, right? Like, when you can take a tile, you should probably take the most valuable tile available. When you place a tile, you should probably place the tile that covers up the most space in an efficient way, because that's going to get you to filling out your boards, completing objectives faster. And then the game is in like, okay, so when do we make concessions to those very basic on their face ideas and move more towards that? But I don't know that I don't think I've ever in my plays, and not that many, maybe played this like 10 times, come to a turn and thought, I'm not going to take a valuable tile when I could take one that isn't awarding points. And I think part of that's just because there's so many. It's pretty difficult to get to a point where you're cutting somebody off of getting a green one they would need.
Sure. I definitely think that it's a heuristic exception, but I think that I'm remarking on the fact that I think that they do exist, which is more interesting to me than if it was never the case.
Yeah.
And at first I thought it was never the case. And now I think that there's room, especially because of achievements, for that to come into place sometimes.
What happens in this game when you start your turn with no tiles?
It sucks.
What happens?
Yeah.
You take a green tile. That's your turn.
That's what I figured it was. Yeah. So, I mean, I've never been in that situation either, because that's like another heuristic, right? If you have one tile, you should always make sure you're claiming at least one other tile.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, it's extremely rare that you don't cover a symbol.
I can't imagine a scenario where like your best move would be to complete a turn that ends up with you having 0 tiles.
Yeah.
What do you all think about the design of the boards themselves? How you always have 2 green wheelbarrows, 2 cement trucks, 1 orange excavator, 1 pit, and 1 construction crew. That's another example of this elegant cleanness of the game.
Yeah.
And they feel really balanced. I've never noticed a board and sort of said, oh, this board seems really good.
Right.
Jake, you're saying, talk to me.
I think actually they can be pretty swingy, just in the way they come out based on what you're trying to already accomplish with your board. But sometimes the way the board lays out is early in the game when you're placing that first tile. I think being able to access the orange construction thing early on is pretty important. And just based on the 2 that's available to you, which might change right before your turn, that may or may not be possible. And I think like it's a pretty big advantage in a game that otherwise has no randomness, essentially, to where if you can grab a board that just happens to fit in well with what you're trying to do.
So you can delay it.
I think, exactly. You could wait, and sort of, I don't think that there's any that are inherently better, but there are some that are situationally better, right?
Right. I just mean if some of the where those icons are different on each board.
Yeah.
And if you get a board that has like the orange tile close to the left side, and that's where you're needing to expand to, that could be like really nice.
I think that you're right that that the boards are. I like the way that the boards, as you said, they have a certain number of green symbols. They have one of these symbols, and that keeps your Bärenpark balanced in a way. That keeps everybody kind of restrained and close to each other. It's like, I want to get an animal house every turn, but I'm not going to be able to. And I still have to work inside of that. And I think the mechanism that I like the best in the way that those work is the pit. Because, in a game that's so about packing, to have just one little space you need to not pack is such a good workaround. And then, of course, putting the bear statue in there is such a satisfying way to actually accomplish the ultimate goal you had in the first place.
I wonder if this game got tested with multiple pits on some boards or on all boards, because it is so interesting that there's just one. It shows such good restraint, which I think is another thing about Phil Walker Harding games, is that his designs show restraint in a really good way. He favors simplicity and cleanness over complexity. And this is one example where it's like, oh, this little bit, this one extra roll, it's going to be so worth it. And he's right. It is so worth it.
Yeah, I think another designer, you could very easily have these, I could.
These boards would be messed up.
Right. Would have like, okay, well, this one has like 3 greens and no, and only 1 white, but I'm balancing out by like not having a pit or something like that. Like assigning, you could very easily see that. And I do think that would make it probably a lesser design. And also, interestingly, I think a decision that was made here that a lot of designers might make a different one is that you can't rotate the boards, right? They all have to have the icon facing the same way, which it's just an interesting choice. I think that would fix the problem of like potentially somebody getting a random benefit, which is actually, I think, really sort of an advantageous thing for like the first player, because they're going to be the one most likely to be able to plan ahead and access that. So I think that would actually kind of fix that in some ways, but aesthetically it wouldn't look as good. And maybe, there are some unforeseen problems there, but I do agree in to your main point though, that I think like a lot of the best designers, you can notice like what they've done successfully in like the restraint. And this is a great example of that, as opposed to like what an awesome like mechanism. So I think like for people who like enjoy that super clean design, I think Reiner Knizia is another designer that's often kind of brought up for the same thing of like, this game is best for like the rules it doesn't have or the mechanism it doesn't have. That's like kind of a hallmark for PWH. Can I come back in the fan club now?
We'll take a vote after the meeting. We're going to give you kind of temporary membership for now.
Okay.
I will just bring up a point of comparison to Silver and Gold. I don't know if you guys have played that, but that's another Phil Walker Harding, a flip and right game. But again, you have I think they're just 1, 2, 3, or 4 sized polyominoes that you're Xing out on little cards. And so there, the cards are the boards and you get different cards, but the point values do change and the boards are less balanced. So there is kind of like, well, this board specializes in palm trees. And when you cover up, you do this kind of thing. Whereas this one has more X's, which give you speed. And I think it exemplifies that, Phil Walker Harding, praise be, he finds these places in designs where it's like, this one can accommodate that. And still Silver and Gold flies by and feels, as simple and clean as this.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. That might be one of my favorite flip and right / roll and right style games.
Yeah.
What haven't we touched on? I feel like we're
Can I bring up the expansion a little bit? I feel like it's.
I know we would love.
I know you guys haven't played
it,
so we have one expansion to Bärenpark so far, but I hope for more, and that is the Bad News Bears, which I thought was like an interesting choice. They kept Bärenpark, the German, but then they just went with Bad News Bears.
Yeah, I don't love that.
They could have done Bear Park or whatever, but Bad News Bears gives us 3 new modules. One of them, I believe, is just new achievement tiles. And it's possible that some that I described earlier are expansion achievement tiles. So that I would say that's something I'm always playing with. They're in the mix of ones I might pull. The second is the monorail system. And this one is really interesting. I talked earlier about how I like expansion modules that access and modify parts of the game that weren't doing too much before. And the way that this works is monorails will go on your green tiles, and they'll have to be kind of 2 apart. So you have 1 square of green, 2 in between, and then another green. And then if you do that, you're able to connect those with this cardboard monorail over the top, which is a bunch of points. There are some tough little rules about that, which is that the monorail has to turn 90 degrees every time it goes. And it can't make a loop. And so that is a really difficult puzzle and one that you can very much lose sight of in a bad way. For players of Bärenpark who are good, it adds a big addition to the decision space because there's like a ton more things you have to think about. Like, okay, well, I know I need to get this animal house down, but if I cover this space with other than green, like my monorail is fully it's done, and I'm going to lose 20 points on it because if you stop your monorail, it will be a lot of points.
How do you access the monorail tiles, Paul?
I think that when you put down a tile, put down a green tile, you can choose to add one of the bases to it, and if you can add a monorail, you do, and they're just there. And again, they have decreasing points like bear statues.
Gotcha.
There might be a slight tweak on what I said there, but it's pretty much expected point values if you can keep making it happen, and you do want to keep making it happen. Yeah, I mean they're
so awesome.
they're just there. It's like here's an additional thing that if you do, there's more points for it, and I do think the only downside to it is that if you don't do it, you're going to lose. And you can set yourself up to just totally botch that because the rules are pretty restrictive. And I've lost games because I got 10 points on monorails and somebody got 35,
Wow.
So,
yeah. So we would call that like an overlaid objective, right? It's just another puzzle that you can work at as, it's just another form of efficiency. You can be efficient in all the same ways that you can be efficient in the base game of Bärenpark. Yes. But at the same time, you could be achieving this other efficiency.
Yeah.
So I love that.
I think Jacob, you would really like balancing that against what feels like the obvious point values of other tiles because knowing, especially early on, when you have to stay next to your stuff, that you're going to try to cover a symbol with the only tile that's in your hand. But covering that symbol with the only tile in your hand is going to be one of the only 2 spaces you're going to be able to extend your monorail. And so it's just, you better keep your wits about you, young man. That's what I say to you today as a 39-year-old. And then the last module, and I can't quite remember the rules of it because I don't like it as much as the other 2, is the grizzly bears. And they are size 6 tiles. The way that you get a grizzly bear tile, and of course they have higher point values, I believe you have to ditch an animal house and a green tile from your hand on your turn as a free action, and then you can claim one of the however many grizzly bear tiles. And I think there are 35 hexamino tiles, and those are not all present. So this is a curated subset. Couldn't get there. Maybe, I'm going to give Phil all the credit and say he said we need 35, and Lookout Spiel said too much cardboard, and they cut it down. Okay, it was the developer. But
drag Lookout Spiel. You heard Paul. Everyone should definitely.
But having a gigantic tile like that in the middle of your board, I can't remember what the point schemes are like, but they might be 12 points or more. So it's good, but it also has huge costs in terms of what your puzzle is going to look like down the road. And also you're giving up 2 tiles to get it. So it's a lot. It's worth doing. When the 3 of us sit down, we'll play with everything in and we'll see how it goes.
At Decision Spa Con.
Ooh.
Decision Spa Day.
Ooh.
This isn't an official announcement. It's just a dream.
It's just a pipe dream.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can come into our Discord and we'll keep talking about it.
I like that. Decision Spa Con.
It sounds pretty good. The monorail has me the most intrigued because I think the game really benefits. The things that I like most about the achievements are when they overlay a puzzle on top of the other decisions. So more of that sounds great. Also, I want to touch on one more thing that we haven't touched on. The 1x1 tile being a porta potty is just like the best. It's just the best.
It is.
It is a porta potty tile.
Not all of them, right? You can.
No, I think they're all toilets, and they say toilets in the rule book. The expansion does come with some. They are toilets, but they look different. And
they're cuter.
There's like bears. They're like bear toilets.
Nice.
But yeah,
bear-shaped toilets.
They're poop.
Love that.
And there is something that happens at the end of the game too, where you're running. Like in some games, you will run out of the 1x1. You'll run out of toilets, and that is a problem for people, and they can't finish their boards and stuff. And I don't know if I like it or dislike it, but it does occur, and it's a part of the game.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, let's jump into our final thoughts, if that's okay with y'all. And I'll go first, which is say, I think one of my key takeaways from this episode was it's always worth reminding, but just the difference in experience that we had playing this online, and Paul, that you've had playing on the table. When we're talking about games, a lot of times on this podcast, we're primarily playing online. Brendan and I don't live in the same place, so that's just a much easier way to connect. It's also a much more cost-effective way to try out a bunch of games and cover them on this podcast. But there are definitely ways that affects the play experience. So I think that's just something I want to keep trying to be more mindful of and ensure too that we're not just playing asynchronously. We're doing at least a few live plays as well for the games we cover. So that was really great bringing that perspective in. So glad that we had you on, Paul, and that you could bring that perspective as well.
Yeah, you board game arena players don't even know that it has the worst insert of all time. And I encourage anybody listening that has not looked it up to find a picture of this online, because if you imagine a rectangular Isle of Skye sized box, okay, Lookout Spiel, and just then, again, you've got gigantic square pieces, one diagonal cutting straight across the box. That's the first half. And then perpendicular to that, another diagonal coming out of the corner. That's the insert for these. What? Like I to this day, you play games sometimes and you're like, this game's not good. I wonder what they were thinking. But you kind of can go, oh, I get it. They thought this would be good. This is a decision that is indefensible and totally incomprehensible. And I apologize. I had to bring it back up again, but I did.
I mean, when you said the word diagonal, that's just
like the red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, 90-degree angle pieces.
Yeah,
there's no business.
So you've got. I should stop.
Super tiny aside before you get to your final thoughts, Brendan. I was playing a BattleCon and something that just defied all reason. I was like looking for the setup in the rule book on page 22.
No, it's yeah.
It's just like what?
Oh, I found it. Yeah. I think that for me, the biggest takeaway is just that the Bärenpark for me has solidified that what I think Phil Walker Harding's design thesis is. Probably not one that is I don't know that he would identify this as himself, but he is so fascinated, and what his designs do so well is timing considerations. Whether it's Imhotep's, that's a game all about timing and tempo, or it's Sushi Go, of the value of things shifting depending on when you take them. That game is about not taking the right things at the wrong time or the wrong things at the right time. And Bärenpark is all about when you do what is good. I think, and some people might be listening to this and say, that's just games, Brendan. But I don't think that's just games necessarily. And I think that the cleanliness that Phil Walker Harding designs into his games, he focuses on these timing considerations to keep the puzzle simple but interesting. And that's a cool takeaway. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, I'm
just,
thoughts? As you were speaking, I was gazing back at my Phil Walker Harding collection on the board, on my shelves here, and thinking about exactly what you're saying about timing. Even, games like Archaeology, Cloud City, Summer Camp, he's pitting a race against other considerations. Or even, I don't know if you've played Dungeon Raiders, but you have a hand of cards you're going to play probably each round. And when do I play the 5? Do I use my 1? Is this the right moment? He does do that really well. Just reclaiming my time here as president of the club, I will remind everyone that we are blessed today to be discussing what we know to be the greatest living designer in this space. In the space of gateway games, Phil Walker Harding is doing it the best, for exactly the reasons you said. But something I'm learning about myself as a board gamer, especially as I play prototypes, is I love games that pay attention to flow, the flow of a turn structure and the flow of the decision space as well. The way that this game gives you options and lets you know their consequences in a pretty straightforward way allows this game to move along and be enjoyable for just about everybody. And I think it's true that the point scheme is a little controlled and balanced in a way that makes it, pretty close even for novice players. That's kind of a hallmark of a lot of great gateway games. It still has so much to offer for people that, want to be thinking big picture and pull off a couple of great moves. So I'm sticking by number 1 tile laying game all time for me, Bärenpark by Phil Walker Harding. Thank you.
And now if there's any questions at all why we call you the president of the Phil Walker Harding Fan Club on our Discord, I think those doubters have been silenced.
Sent away.
It's very clear.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Paul, so much for your time. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Decision Space. As always, you can find all our links in the show notes for this podcast. We'd really love if you want to jump into the Discord and hang out and talk with us. We'd love reviews. And if you're so inclined, we also have a Patreon. Paul, anything you have to plug today?
Not much. All I can tell you is we're working hard on the Honey Buzz expansions, fall flavors. That is getting really close to production probably, and I hope to see some folks at Origins. I'll be there hopefully with a prototype playing and also playing some Star Realms.
Awesome.
Amazing. Thank you so much again, Paul, and happy birthday. We're so lucky that you spent at least a little bit of it with us today. Hope you have a blast. See y'all next week.
And thanks as always to Hembry for our intro and outro music. Reach out.